Welcome to Chateau de Montmuran, a real medieval fortress. We're in the commune of Les Ifs in Brittany between Rennes and Saint-Malo and next to the other medieval town of Dinan. It was once owned by Bertrand du Guesclin and Admiral de Coligny, among others. The oldest part of Montmuran dates back to the 12th century, and these are the two towers you see before you. It's true that you can only see one of the two towers. The one you see is the garrison tower. The more important one is the Tour du Connétable, the keep, but as it was the castle's centerpiece, it couldn't be seen from either inside or outside. So several centuries, we've got the 12th century, and you've got the central part, which is 17th century, and was remodeled in the 18th century. And in front of you is this impressive defensive châtelet, which dates back to the 14th and 15th centuries. In the 15th century, Montmuran was a castle with 7 towers. The only possible entrance to the castle is right in front of you. It was this drawbridge. So I say, there are 2 drawbridges, a large one that allowed passage, and a small one for men on foot. In times of peace, like today, the 2 bridges were completely lowered, but in more complicated times, the 2 drawbridges were raised and the chateau became virtually impregnable. So, what will you see on our tour? Well, you'll see the Chateau Chapelle. You'll also see the model of the chateau with its 7 towers, since Montmuran had 7 towers in the 14th century. And you'll also see something quite impressive, the restoration of Montmuran's 2 12th century towers. How do you go about restoring towers that are over 800 years old? Well, you'll be able to climb to the top of the scaffolding, enjoy a breathtaking panorama, and above all, see parts of the chateau that are never open to the public at present. Now come with me and we'll go into the depths of Montmuran. In front of you is something quite unusual and remarkable. You have 250-year-old lime trees, classified as remarkable trees. So here we are in the chapel of Chateau de Montmuran, where Bertrand du Guesclin was armed in 1354 and where he married Jeanne de Laval in his second marriage in 1374. At the same time, he became the owner of the chateau, since Jeanne de Laval was the owner of Montmuran. This chapel was rebuilt in 1902, since a fire in 1889 destroyed the entire 14th and 15th century section. So you're looking at a beautiful stained glass window that sums up important moments in the life of Montmuran. The 2 panels at bottom left represent the construction of Montmuran in 1170. And then you have events from Bertrand du Guesclin's life, namely a siege, an ambush he held against the English when he was 17. And then on the 2 panels at top left, you have the moment when Bertrand du Guesclin was knighted in the Chateau Chapelle. Then there's a section of stained glass showing Bertrand du Guesclin's marriage to Jeanne de Laval. Then, in front of you, there's a model showing how Montmuran Castle looked in the 15th century. You can see there are 7 towers. Montmuran really was a stronghold during the War of the Breton Succession, the 100 Years' War, and today, well, 4 towers remain. So we came in over the drawbridge here, and we're now in the chapel, which is here. And you have what's left of the 12th century part. We have these 2 towers. So these are the 2 towers that were attacked by the Merul and are currently being restored. This fresco, which also dates from 1902, depicts an episode in Bertrand du Guesclin's life that takes place in Place des Lys in Rennes. Bertrand du Guesclin was a relatively young man at the time. He was 15 and wanted to take part in a tournament. His father, Robert du Guesclin, forbade it. Nevertheless, Bertrand du Guesclin decided to take part in the tournament, borrowing a suit of armor and a horse from one of his uncles, and went to fight in Rennes. And he knocked out all his opponents, and as he had no coat of arms, he was passed off as the unknown cavalier. This fresco shows his last opponent. He raises his spear to call for combat, and we notice, unfortunately with difficulty, that the horse and rider's coat of arms feature a double-headed eagle. This is the weapon, the arms, the coat of arms of Bertrand du Guesclin's family. Bertrand du Guesclin, who was on the left of the fresco, saw the horseman's coat of arms and thought, "These are my family's arms, so the person in front of me is my father." Unwilling to fight his father, he lowers his spear to refuse combat. At that moment, he raises his helm. His father recognizes his son, takes some blood from his wound, crosses his coat of arms, and now gives Bertrand du Guesclin his own coat of arms, a double-headed eagle with a red stripe. I mentioned earlier that this chapel was destroyed by fire in 1889. So I'm going to show you a little curiosity that's never been shown to the general public before, namely the inside of this part that we call the burnt part. Here we go. Here we are in the 15th century tower, which was burnt down in 1889. You'll be able to see some pretty amazing things, like a fireplace on a floor that no longer exists. This part has never been open to the public. It's really stayed in its original state. We just made a few modifications to provide a floor for the structures to stand on. But otherwise, since 1889, nothing has happened. Maybe it'll be part of future restoration projects, maybe for the next generations. There you have it, one generation at a time. So, as you can see, a medieval castle requires many investments and restorations. I'll now take you to the 12th century section, which we're currently restoring, and which is a truly emblematic project. Come on, let's get going. Now, there are a few steps to climb. We'll save our breath and climb to the top of the scaffolding, but we'll go through the inner part of the 12th century section. This way, you'll also be able to see other rooms that have never been open to the public, such as the 15th century steam rooms. So here we are in the keep. This is really the part where the Lord and his family lived, with relatively thick walls. This part has never been opened to the public. These are rooms we don't live in at all, since they're unheated and difficult to heat. It's true that you feel it a little in winter, but in summer, it's a very temperate room. Why is that? Well, it's all down to the thickness of the walls. Here they're about 3 meters thick, but when the tower is at its base, they can be up to 8 meters thick. So in terms of temperature, these are rooms that don't change much. So when we have periods of heat wave, these are rooms that are very pleasant to live in. So now we're going to climb a few more steps. And yes, in a castle, you spend your time going up and down. It's a great exercise. And I'm going to show you a jewel, something which today has not yet been presented to the public for security reasons. These are the ovens at Chateau de Montmorency. Come on, if there are 2 or 3 in France, that's a maximum. So I'm going to shed some light on this, because we're still in a rather austere climate. These ovens were restored by my father some 25 years ago and have never been opened to the public. How it works is very simple. Here you have a hearth into which wood was placed and which heated a slab, which was located approximately here. At this level, a stone slab that we'll see in a moment, there was water there which was heated. And once this water was lukewarm, it was put into the receptacle there, and it was going to be collected on the other side. You'll see the other side is a little better. Here we go. So here we are in the oldest part of the Chateau de Montmorency, and the most majestic for me too, namely Bertrand du Guesclin's bedroom. This is where the Lord lived with his entire family. You can see that the nobility of this room comes essentially from its majesty and all the sculptures you can see on the various vaults. And it was in this room that the steam rooms were created. Traditionally, the Lady of Montmirain would steam herself with her distinguished guests. Fortunately, that's all changed nowadays. Now we're inside the oven proper. I showed you earlier a little receptacle on the other side where we poured water, and well, the other part is here. The water was collected here. At ground level, we're above the fireplace, which was heated. Water was poured onto this slab, creating steam. And the water flowed through this outlet and straight into the moat. So this part, we've never opened it to the public for one simple reason: safety. With the work we're now undertaking on the tower, the aim is obviously to be able to show you these ovens on a specially adapted tour. You can see in this room that there is a rather impressive amount of scaffolding. Why is this? Why this restoration? How did it come about? Well, this work was completely unanticipated. It's linked to a marula problem. Marula is a linivorous fungus, the disease of old houses. In February 2020, I saw a huge fungus on a beam, which appeared in a very, very short space of time. I said to myself, there's got to be a problem. We're going to have to intervene quickly. The fungus arrived on this part of the wall. And what had to be done very quickly, because fungus doesn't wait, was to clear out the whole attic that is located above. And that caused vibrations. And the beam you have in front of you here fell. In fact, it was eaten away entirely from the inside by marula. So, from a safety point of view, we obviously had to scaffold the entire room. And to cure marula, you need good roofing, which wasn't the case. You needed good framing, which wasn't the case either. You needed good masonry, which wasn't the case. So we really had to restart the entire construction of the tower, from the masonry to the roof. So, I'm going to show you now the start of the reconstruction of these covers as we begin with the small tower, the garrison tower. I'll show you. Here we are in the garrison tower. So, if you remember earlier, compared to what you can see from the outside, these are imposing towers, but in terms of room diameter, they're relatively small. All things considered, of course, this is purely due to the thickness of the walls. Let me remind you that in the 12th century, we're in the middle of the Middle Ages. The aim of architecture and construction was to be defensive. So there, just above our heads, we have the tower's spire. It's the new structure, the new base of the future framework of this room, which for us has quite a telling historical and family effect, since one of my great-great-uncles was an impressionist painter, Olivier de La Villéon, and this was his bedroom. As a reminder, he left a painting on one of the doors. So, welcome to the nerve center of Montmirain, to the Montmirain Roofing and Carpentry Restoration Worksite. We were elected emblematic project for the Brittany region in the Bern mission. For us, it's a great source of satisfaction and recognition, which proves that this project has meaning. Come on, let's get to the center of the tower. Here we're standing in the middle of the future splice. So the future base of the new framework structure of this tower, of this keep. Then you can see over your heads, you have the cleft, which represents the old structure of the tower, which dates back to the 18th century. We decided to make a change to the existing structure. If we're going to build a new structure, we might as well restore this part of the building to its former glory. We're going to rebuild the roof and framework as they were in the 12th century, that is with much higher structures and this time with a round roof. And to give you an idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished, there's an umbrella above our heads, enabling the craftsmen to work in complete safety and under good conditions. The spandrel, that is the metal rod above the tower, will extend beyond this umbrella, so will be more than, I think, 28 to 30 meters high. And we'll keep this part of the framework that will not necessarily be used to support our new structures, but rather as a reminder of the 18th century, a reminder of history. It's also important to be able to preserve as many elements as possible on this new structure. The timbers here are from the 18th century, but there are also timbers from the 12th century, which will be reused, recut and treated, and which will serve as parts for the new structure. So now we're going to take a look at the base of the garrison tower and see the work of the craftsmen. All the craftsmen on this site are regional companies. They're all within a 10-kilometer radius of Montmorand. It's important for us to be able to work with local companies. As Montmorand is classified as a historic monument, we can benefit from subsidies, whether from the Brittany region or from the Regional Directorate of Cultural Affairs. It seemed logical and important to us that the subsidies we receive should be channeled back into the Breton economy and to Breton companies. In fact, we wanted to give meaning to our work. Let me show you the base of this little tower. You can see that each structural element has been cut by hand. No machines or other modern equipment were used. Like electric saw, for example, for these jobs. All restoration work is carried out as it was done in the 12th century, according to the rules of the art. It's a relatively important requirement. We can rebuild, but we don't use concrete beams or metal beams. We're rebuilding with oak using the same techniques as in the 12th century. It's true that it's a bit of a communion with history, since this part of the tower, for the most part, has remained undiscovered for 800 years. And to be able to stand next to these stones, next to these pieces of wood that have stood for 800 years, it's a very moving thing. And to be able to bring them back to life, to give them a second lease of life after 800 years, that's the gamble we're taking and that we're going to succeed in. I'm going to show you the passageway of the old curtain wall, which allowed you to move from the 12th century part of the castle to the 14th century part. To the other part of the 14th century, a sort of parapet walk that passed through the rampart. Come on, let's have a look at it. This is the cracked part. As you can see, there's a stone lintel here. In fact, this whole section will be removed from the masonry, and we're going to put back a wooden door, just as it was in the 12th century. So it also lets us, yes, well, there's the tarpaulin here, but it lets us imagine what the height of the wall, the rampart between the two towers might have been. Once again, we're really talking about defensive and medieval elements. Here again is an ancient passageway, which led to the other towers, if you remember the model, to the other towers of the chateau. But today, given that there's an 18th century section behind it, it's walled in at 4 meters. So it really was a labyrinth. And when you were at the top of the towers, you could go all the way around the castle. We're going to take you to a small platform where you can see the view from the top of the towers of the Chateau de Montmorand. So once again, Montmirain was really built in a feudal fashion and had a defensive character. That's why the panorama is so impressive. This made it much easier for the Lord and his army to keep an eye on the surrounding area. So Montmirain isn't Notre Dame, but it is my very own old lady. Whatever we can preserve, whatever the era, we'll try to do it. That's why you've got an 18th century window next door that looks completely isolated and secure. We're going to redo the masonry to preserve it as much as possible. Montmirain really is an old lady. And today, we're going to give it a new lease of life, a second youth. In a way, it's the aim of each successive generation at Montmirain to be able to contribute to the building while we're here, and then pass it on to future generations. This is the panorama, the point of view we could have had in the 12th century. From here, on a clear day, you can see for about 20 kilometers. You have to imagine it in a different context. There were no new houses or contemporary houses. There were only fields, woods, and farms. That's why the Bâtiments de France are also very careful about what can be built around listed monuments and castles, so as to preserve this environment and allow historic monuments to evolve in a visually healthy environment. Here too, we have a view of the chateau's former stables just below. There are stables and granaries dating back to the 17th century. This century is not insignificant, as it was at the very time when fortified castles were being dismantled. I mean the strong parts of the castles. The fortifications were removed to make new buildings that could be lived in. The stones of the various tower structures were removed to rebuild the main building, now habitable in the 18th century, and to rebuild all the outbuildings around Montmirain and in Montmirain too. The advantage of having a scaffold is that it also allows us to carry out a health check on the rest of the Montmirain structure. And from here, we can see that this will not, in my opinion, be my last project. There will be others. The Châtelet de Défense has also suffered from various storms and the passage of time, and it too will need a facelift in a few years' time. We're going to be working hard on this project and beyond. Once it is back in better health, we can restore the following parts. So, we've been talking a lot about medieval historic parts. I've also mentioned the 17th century section, the central part. What I'd like to suggest is that we go back down through the scaffolding and take a look at one or two salons in this 18th century section. Welcome to one of the salons at Chateau de Montmirain. It's a room that's usually more of a family room than an open one, since it's our living room. But as it's a room, we make available for our various receptions in case of rain. So it's true that as soon as May arrives, all our furniture is moved to another room to leave it available for weddings. But as it rains from time to time in Brittany, this room can be used for receptions. Here we have a second 18th century salon, which is also a reception room that we make available for various functions. This room was completely refurbished a few years ago, including the door and window frames. Unfortunately, we've had water damage for the past 2 months, which I think needs to be treated, and then we'll be able to patch the hole and repaint again. So, all the paintings you have here are family heirlooms, especially the one that means a lot to me, the painting of Vice Admiral de La Villéon, who was commander of the ship named Ville de Paris during the Revolution. So, we've come to the end of this tour of the Chateau de Montmirault. I hope you found it interesting. Don't hesitate to come and see us, to visit the Chateau de Montmirault, which is open from June to September, and even to take part in the Heritage Days, which always take place on the third weekend in September. If you can't make it but still want to support our work, you can help us financially via the Demure Historique website. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in Montmirault.